Gender and sex have become two of the most bitterly debated concepts in the world today. So much so that an American presidential candidate could win or lose the highest office in the world based on whether they think men can get pregnant. This is as hilarious as it is horrifying. So in this video, I want to present a nuanced perspective on sex and gender. I'll talk about concepts like masculinity, femininity, the toxic versions of each, to what extent gender is either socially or biologically influenced, and the implications of it all. To start off, let's outline a few ideas and terms. Progressive ideology is sought to separate sex from gender, where gender is your behavior or expression and your sex is a set of arbitrary and unimportant physical characteristics. So according to progressives, someone is a man not because they are born male, but because they are compelled to act in a masculine way, whether through their personal identity or cultural pressure, and vice versa for women. They also argue that this expression is on a spectrum where very few people are fully masculine or feminine. Rather, we all have some masculine inclinations and some feminine inclinations. The other side of this debate argues that gender is either entirely or partly influenced by biological sex, which then in turn further influences the inclinations, experiences, and ideal behaviors for either males or females. So, for example, they would say males are biologically compelled to be aggressive or dominant, and the individual and society needs to take that into account, either restrict those urges or harness them into something productive, whereas the progressive side would argue that society teaches males to act that way and there's nothing there that's part of their inherent biological nature. So what is the answer? Well, there are countless studies that show average differences in male and female behavior, but it's very easy to discredit those studies by saying, well, it's culture that has caused that separation. To me, saying there's no biological component or saying there is no social component both seem like extreme positions. Clearly, culture, media, and our social circles dramatically influence how we behave. At the same time, males produce more testosterone, which we know masculinizes the body, behavior, and the brain, and females also have their own unique cocktail of hormones. The best way to express gender and sex is on a graph like this. Most studies into physiological sex differences come out with these two overlapping bell curves. Now again, this could be socialization. However, we also know that in countries where they've made the most effort to minimize those social pressures, those curves drift further apart. So yes, this isn't a perfect model, but it is the best we've got. So the right curve is males, the left curve is females, and as we move rightward, we represent people who tend to have more masculine traits, and leftward, we have feminine traits. Well, the median man is quite masculine, and the median female is quite feminine. The most masculine people tend to be males, and the most feminine people tend to be females, but there is a substantial crossover. Let's use the Australian population, approximately 26 million people, with approximately 13 million males and 13 million females. Well, in this part of the graph, we have maybe 20% of females who are more masculine than the average person, which in Australia would mean millions of females. And in this part here, we have maybe 5% of females who are more masculine than the average male, which also means more than 500,000 females. Similarly, we have 20% of males who are more feminine than the average person. Again, this is millions of males in Australia, and similarly, let's say 5% of males who are more feminine than the average female. So there is a biological average, but a lot of people don't fit that average. And if you're talking about a country like Australia, a large-scale society, that means millions of people. However, the majority of males are more masculine than they are feminine, and the majority of females are more feminine than they are masculine. So we can't entirely avoid gender stereotypes and different aggregate behavior between males and females. My guess would be many in the LGBT community exist in these parts of the curve. Many males in the arts would be in this part of the curve. Engineering or robotics would likely be people in this part of the curve. Just because there isn't a 50-50 balance in every industry, it doesn't necessarily mean there are underlying factors of discrimination. It doesn't mean there aren't either, it just needs further analysis. We can also look at the extremes. The most masculine, dominant, aggressive people are mostly males, and a profession like being in the special forces clearly selects for the most masculine, dominant, aggressive people. being in care industries generally selects for the most compassionate, caring, and empathetic people. What the progressive side identifies well is the immense variety of human behavior. Not all males exclusively want to act in a masculine way, and not all females exclusively feel like acting in a feminine way. On top of that, culture and society has historically compelled males and females to act that way, which came at a significant emotional and sometimes physical cost to many people. What the other side identifies well is that we are not blank slates. We have millions of years of genetic programming that shape who we are. Also, gender roles were often adaptive. In a farming society where families had 6 children, the division of labor made perfect sense, and on a mass scale, fostered a much more effective society. The social environment and biology aren't independent variables either. There's an interplay between the two. For example, we know males are on average stronger and larger than females. So hypothetically, if you had 2 androgynous 12-year-olds, but then one of them grew 20% larger and also became much hornier, and the other was often the subject of that horniness and endured an often painful menstrual cycle every month, well, even if all other socialization factors are the same, in another 10 years, those different biological experiences would create 2 different personalities. So it could be that the biology isn't directly creating those personality differences, but the experiences that are caused by the changes in biology could be affecting those personality differences. There are also countless other variables that affect the average behavior of males and females. The environment and sexual selection obviously play a role. Let's say you're a little village in the Dark Ages and you're constantly being raided. Well, those most likely to survive would be physically strong and aggressive, and biologically, these would be males, so women might start looking for those features in a potential mate. Women with markers of fertility and femininity are likely to produce and rear the most offspring. Males start sexually selecting for those markers, thus facilitating the greatest chance of the village and their own genes surviving and prospering. Then a cultural code may develop where people are socially pressured into maximizing and harnessing these masculine and/or feminine characteristics, and over years and generations, those cultural and sexual selection pressures would alter the genetic expression and biology of that population. It could get to a point where that village becomes a society and has prospered so much that the environment is no longer unsafe. People start seeking out partners with different qualities, such as intelligence, on top of the capacity for aggression and physical strength. There may be a subset of males and females who are attracted to the same sex, or are just different from the norm, and previously they were pressured to fill roles that were beneficial for the survival of the village, but now, in this safer environment, the population prospers by maximizing individual expression, and look, this could be where we are today. So human behavior, including gender, is extremely malleable and adaptable, but at the same time, our biology has been molded based on various sets of those aforementioned pressures over millions of years, and that heavily influences our behavior. Think of our genes like a tree. The trunk was shaped and solidified billions of years ago. Mammals went down one branch millions of years ago. Then Homo sapiens went down their own little twig 200,000 years ago. And the specific leaf that represents your unique genes can be influenced in a single lifetime with epigenetic factors such as diet, lifestyle, nutrition, and culture. So what actually is masculine and feminine behavior? Well, the answer is clearly subjective, and there are some populations that have very different answers, but like with the previous graph, there is still a norm, and we have a general idea across human society what is considered masculine and what is considered feminine. Let's use a 4-circle Venn diagram here. On the top left, you have positive femininity, and this would be traits and states like nurturing, empathy, kindness, care, beauty. Then on the right, we have positive masculinity with attributes and states like logic, discipline, stoicism, structure, order. Then there are attributes that could be construed as both. Maybe protection, bravery, leadership, we could put them there. Underneath, we can describe toxic masculinity as domination, cruelty, brutality. The most toxic masculine state would be psychopathy or Machiavellianism, where you're purely self-interested with zero regard for other people. Then we could describe toxic femininity as self-pity, solipsism, jealousy, passive aggression, shaming. The most toxic feminine state could be narcissism, where you're always playing the victim and everything is a personal attack. Something like hedonism or bullying could be seen as both. Adopting or developing these toxic traits could be a trauma response. If you've been hurt by the opposite gender or you live in an unsafe environment, you could gravitate towards these attributes. For many, it's also difficult to differentiate between the positive and toxic variations of these states or ideas. Logic and structure could look like domination or brutality. Empathy and care for the downtrodden could look like jealousy or even narcissism. Let's go back to these bell curves. I'd like to conclude the video with this final point. If people on this right side of the graph, who are mostly males, are not offered an avenue for positive masculinity, they gravitate towards toxic masculinity because there is a biological element at play. Likewise, if people on this side of the graph are not offered a pathway to positive femininity, they gravitate towards toxic femininity. Progressive culture right now is fixated on the people in these parts of the graph, and that's what progressives are so good at, identifying people who may be left out, downtrodden, or underprivileged and helping them. However, at what point does maximizing the freedom and well-being for those who are different come at the emotional cost of everyone else? By celebrating females with overtly masculine traits and implicitly making that the cultural ideal, does that harm the well-being of most other females by encouraging all males to have more positively feminine traits and shaming the ones who don't? You're creating resentment, frustration, and disillusionment. Obviously, we wouldn't expect females to be as physically strong as males. Is it biologically possible for most males to be as empathetic as females? And if it isn't, can you judge them for that? There's clearly a tension between caring for the downtrodden and the overall efficiency of a society or system. Like I said, if we're talking about Australia, millions of people exist in this part of the graph. And of course, it goes without saying, a human being is more than just a dot on a graph. They have their own hopes, dreams, ambitions, imperfections. But it's putting all our focus on those who are different, adversely affecting the well-being of society at large. Let me know what you think. Thanks for watching.